views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Coming up on this edition of Today's Verdict, we continue to bring you everything you need to know about the coronavirus and your legal rights as we once again come to you from my home. First guest, New York State Senator Luis Sepulveda will discuss his introduction of the Dignified Burial Act, a bill designed to ensure that sufficient financial assistance is available to buried loved ones during this trying time. Next up, elder law attorney Ronald Fatoullah discusses the CARES Act and how our local senior citizens can benefit from a stimulus payment and no penalty for failing to withdraw from their retirement accounts this year. And finally, two guests from the Marshall Project will be here to discuss COVID-19 testing in U.S. prisons and the lack of information that is being provided to the public. As you can see, we have much to get to. Today's Verdict starts right now. State Senator Luis Sepulveda. I'm a big fan. First of all, Senator, how are you feeling?
Well, so far so good. I've tried to limit my my physical contact outside of my family and those constituents that need assistance that otherwise wouldn't get any. I fall in that range. I think the third highest risk group. Anyone who's between I'm 50, almost 57 years old now, so I'm reaching the area where I run a higher risk. One family member tested positive. She's doing better. It's my niece.
Okay.
But so far, my family's managed to stay healthy, and I'm truly blessed for that.
Well, that's good news. We seem to both be in the same age category. All right, let's talk a little bit about a very important bill that you're sponsoring, the Dignified Burial Act.
Yes.
Can you tell the viewers a little bit about that?
Well, to be perfectly honest, I've thought about this issue for some time now, but the person who really concretized it for me was Assemblywoman Catalina Cruz from the Queens area, Jackson Heights primarily. She herself, once being an undocumented immigrant, is now a member of the New York State Assembly, and talk about the American dream and following through with it. Catalina is a wonderful person with a big heart. And we had a discussion where she said, let's propose a bill where we can expand the amount of money that people can get for assistance for funeral services, especially under the current crisis. One of the biggest problems we have with the current program, government assistance to the city, is that it doesn't allow undocumented immigrants to apply and receive the benefits. And so one important element for us, her being a very pro-immigrant, undocumented individual myself, looking out for a group of people that really are one of the most marginalized people in our society. So we thought these individuals work at jobs that nobody else wants to work. There was a New York Times article recently, which I believe the title was "When You're an Essential Worker but Not Treated as One." They were talking about farm workers. We talk about people that sell food in the street, people that that take care of our families, are old, and essentially to not being able to allow them to give their family members or themselves, if they pass away, a dignified burial is something that's unconscionable to me and to Assemblywoman Cruz. And so we proposed a bill to expand the services to undocumented, and the numbers are expanded. So right now, the city contributes about $900, assists $900 for funeral services. As long as the overall cost of the funeral service doesn't exceed $1,700. Now, we know that in today's day and age, that most, if not, yeah, it's a pittance. Yes. Relatively speaking, it's a pittance. And so even those individuals that are not undocumented, that qualify, this is very little help. And so what we plan to do is we want to expand the number to assist individuals. We want to give the overall cost should be about $4,000, because I believe that is more in tune with what you're facing with funeral costs and the pandemic. And the assistance will be about $3,000. So we're going to change the threshold number in terms of the cost, the threshold number in terms of the assistance, and add undocumented immigrants as a group of people that can benefit from this program.
Well, let me ask you a question. Where is the money coming from? Does it come from HRA? Does it come from the federal government as well? Where would the money be coming from really to maybe get up to that $4,000 per burial?
Well, the money flows in different ways. If we get federal assistance, then we have more money to fund other programs through the state, which then the funding through the state can be passed on to the city. And so really, just like most assistance that we need today, a lot of it comes from the federal government and their desire to want to help New York State. Unfortunately, and I don't mean to offend anyone, but I think President Trump is as he does with most things, is playing politics, even during this crisis. He recently put an edict out that he'll help New York State more if they stop being sanctuary cities, or New York City stops being a sanctuary city, something that is unconscionable, because New York City has always been the home to immigrants, the home to undocumented, it treats everybody with respect and dignity. And so we're going to need federal help so we can then get to the state, and then the state can pass the money down to the city where they essentially fund this program.
Senator, let me ask you something. Logistically, right now, it looks like there seems to be an overflow at the funeral homes. What's going on? Are we able to get them to be able to take some of the bodies? What do you hear?
It's just a terrible, terrible crisis in so many different ways. A lot of that has to do with the fact that the federal government didn't do its job in preparing us for this pandemic and ignored warning signs time and again. And we're seeing more and more stories coming out in credible publications that say that essentially President Trump ignored, was more concerned about the Wall Street and his reelection than preparing society for what was coming. And New York State and New York City are suffering the greatest consequences of any other place, I say, in the world now. You're seeing stories, for example, in Brooklyn, a funeral home there where they were putting deceased individuals in trucks, in U-Haul trucks. And some people walking by were smelling decomposition. The funeral homes are just terribly overwhelmed. They don't have the ability, I believe, to be able to handle the crisis that we have now. A lot of members don't even know that their families are being held there. People don't even know that their families passed away, and were put in settings. It's not just the funeral homes, by the way. It's also hospitals where family members don't even know where the deceased are located. I can tell you a particular story that I had to intervene. A woman of the Garifuna community, which has a very large population in the Bronx, relatively speaking, of course, but she had passed away 2.5 weeks ago, and the family could not locate her. They had put her in an ambulance because she had severe symptoms. And before she even reached the hospital, she had passed away. And for 2.5 weeks, the family didn't know what hospital she was sent to. They couldn't get access through 911. They couldn't get access to the ambulance company. It was terrible. And, we had to call the city. We had to make several calls. And ultimately, we located her at our local hospital in the Bronx, and she had passed away. And for 14.5 days, the family had no idea where the woman's body was located. And so this is the stories that you're hearing, and she's in a contained environment at a hospital. It's also overflowing. You're seeing pictures of, even in hospitals where people are being kept, deceased individuals are being kept in corridors and hallways. This is just something awful that we're dealing with.
Do things seem to be getting a little bit better, though? Does it seem, as the numbers are going down, that there's a little bit less of a flow in terms of deceased to these funeral homes, or is there just still a backup?
No, there's still a backup. Look, when the numbers were at an all-time high, there was a backup. And, yes, it's gotten a little easier, but while you have, I believe yesterday's toll was 306 people that died. 306 people dying in a day is an incredibly high number. It's not, at the highest level where we had over 780 people pass away, but it's still a high number. And we're still dealing with those, first 10, 15,000 people who passed away.
Wow.
We're still dealing with that. And, unless we get some level of assistance, especially to the federal government, this is going to be another tragedy that we're going to have to deal with in the city of New York.
Well, it's so important, and I'm sure your constituents and the rest of us are lucky to have you. The Dignified Burial Act, everybody should get behind it. It's very, very important. And State Senator, thank you so much for joining us. Of course, please, as always, stay safe if you could.
Thank you so much, and thank you for bringing attention to the bill. This is very important to people who want to ensure that, people will say, well, they're undocumented immigrants, they don't pay taxes, which is completely false. They contribute billions of dollars to the state and the city and the federal government. And because of their status, they can't get a lot of this back. And so we as all human beings should all be allowed to have a dignified way of leaving this earth. And your immigration status should be irrelevant ultimately to this endeavor.
Well said, and we agree totally. All right. Thanks again, State Senator.
Thank you. Stay safe.
All right. We'll be back with some more Today's Verdict right after this. Ronald Fatoullah, friend of the show. Of course, we are filming from my home once again. Ronald, thanks for being here.
Thank you, David.
Tell the viewers a little bit about what you've been doing, at least professionally.
Well, as an elder law and estate planning attorney, we deal with a lot of older people. And older people tend to be more susceptible to this crazy disease. Everyone is susceptible, but older people much, much more so. So we see so many of our clients who are struck with this. We do lots of Medicaid applications. And so then people are at home. Some of the home care attendants might have been exposed and give it to the older person, and they don't even know they're exposed. Many of our clients in nursing homes have passed away. And we're getting a lot of calls to do Medicaid applications for home care and nursing home care, and the home care rules are changing. In the middle of all of this, the world has changed with what I do. The laws have changed with what I do. And it's like everything has been turned on its head.
Well, how do you communicate with the client if the client needs to sign healthcare proxies, living wills, applications? How do you go about that?
Okay, well, thank God. The governor, I think, is doing a great job with regard to this virus. He's actually came out with an executive order about more than a month ago, or at least a month ago, saying that we could notarize remotely, which is wonderful. And then he came out with another executive order a couple of weeks ago that said we could actually witness remotely as well. So
that's big. That's very big for
That's
Will.
huge.
That's very
right.
big.
It's only until May 7th, but I will bet my bottom dollar that this is going to be extended, in my opinion. So, and people need to plan now, and they want wills. And I'm getting calls. My wife is on a ventilator. True story. It's a friend of mine, unfortunately. My wife is on a ventilator in the hospital, and we never followed your advice. We don't have any documents. What do we do? So I'm helping clients like that. I'm doing a lot of probate where clients have died in nursing homes and just at home. And it's very sobering dealing with the population that I deal with, for the most part, elder law and the estate planning. But we're able to do everything now. And I tell my clients, it's actually even easier now than it used to be. Because you don't have to come to us. You don't have to come to us for witnesses and notary. You could be on your living room couch and getting all these documents done, but you want to get them done before, God forbid, you get this virus or something else.
Let me ask you a question. When you deal with some of the clients, do you do it this way as well, in terms of through Google Hangouts or through a Zoom where you can see them, or is it usually on the phone, or both?
Yeah, it's typically both, but most people want to see me. In fact, right after the show here for me, I'm going right on a Zoom meeting with a client who needs to plan, wants to get these documents in place. They've been holding off, dilly-dallying for a couple of years, and now it's very real. Their peers, their friends are getting ill, and and now they get got that big kick in the backside to start to plan. So now all of a sudden it's a rush, and we're doing it. But that's my next Zoom meeting, the moment we hang up here.
Let's shift gears a little bit to the financial strains on the seniors of the country. Certainly with their retirement accounts, it's seen a big hit.
Sure.
I've talked to my parents about their own financial accounts, and it got hit. What advice would you give to somebody who's seen a tremendous loss in their IRA or their pension, and what laws protect them? If you could maybe talk to them, if you could.
Absolutely. Well, look, you don't want to be scared and start to sell your whole portfolio at a low valuation. But as you age, hopefully you don't have 100% in stocks or even 75% in stocks. Hopefully your allocations are maybe what they should be. You know, a 75-year-old should not have, in my opinion, 75, 80% in stocks, maybe 20%. You know, so hopefully your allocations are the allocations are fine and what they should be. But the CARES Act, which was signed by the president, and this is nationwide, does provide that you don't have to take those RMDs, or required minimum distributions, on your retirement accounts. And why take them now when valuations are low? They fluctuate. You know, the markets.
But does it affect your ability to get the medical care that you need? That's really the concern, I think, of so many seniors. If you don't take it,
yes, well, not your Medicare, but if you're on if you're on Medicare, you're fine. You know, don't take your distributions unless you need to. Let the monies grow tax deferred, and why sell equities at a low point? But if you're on Medicaid, things are very different. In fact, I changed the law on Medicaid and retirement accounts. And the law does provide, or at least the policy does provide, that retirement accounts in payout status are exempt from Medicaid. And if you don't take your required distributions, Medicaid will say that that is no longer an exempt asset. If you want your retirement account to be exempt, you got to take your required minimum distributions. But if you're not on Medicaid and don't intend to apply, I would hold off and not take your distributions this year unless you need them.
Well, let me ask you a question, and it's a little confusing, and I don't know if you can answer it, but what if you have parents and each one has their own individual retirement account, but they file jointly, let's say? Can one take the minimum distribution, but the other not take? How does that work?
Yes. I mean, it's an IRA is an individual retirement account. Each one could do what they want. Right. If one spouse is on Medicaid and the other spouse is not on Medicaid, and maybe that IRA was exempt, every case is different.
I understand.
You know, so we might say to that spouse, maybe you should take your distributions now this year, or maybe not. It depends on the facts of the case. And actually more specifically, but it's hard to, I don't want to get too specific, whether or not that spouse signed a spousal refusal for Medicaid. Okay. That would be a factor.
First of all, this is very important. Where do we find you? Unfortunately, a lot of people are going to want to reach out to you, you know, either for living wills, healthcare proxies, or unfortunately to set up the estate because they've lost somebody. Where do we find you?
Sure. Thanks so much. And living trust as well. Yes, I'm on Long Island and in New York City. On Long Island, my number is 516-466-4422. In New York City, in the boroughs, I'll just give one of our 718 numbers, 718-261-1700.
All right, do me a favor. We don't have too much time. Some tips. Someone's watching today. They're scared. They have a loved one not doing so well in the hospital. What advice would you give them?
Call an attorney such as myself. Make sure that we get a plan in place. If they still could sign documents, even if they could just shake their head, that's okay. If they're lucid, we could get those documents signed. We've done them in the hospitals now. We've done them in the nursing homes and the assisted living facilities. Get the documents signed, get a plan together. What if they need chronic care? We need to get a plan in place now.
Well, Ronald, most importantly, you stay safe, you and your family. And
You too, David.
hopefully the next time we see you, it'll be in our studio again.
God willing, God willing. Thank you, David. Take care. Thanks
My
so
pleasure.
much.
All right, we'll be back with some more Today's Verdict right after this. All right, we're here with Tom Meagher and Katie Park, both of the Marshall Project, which is such an important project because it deals with our prisons and those who are being affected by COVID-19. I want to thank both of you for being here. How are you doing today?
Good. Thank you for having us.
And most importantly, I hope both of you have been safe and your families have been safe. Let's get right to it. Katie, let's talk a little bit about the Marshall Project itself. What do we mean when we say the Marshall Project? What is that?
Well, we're a nonprofit newsroom that is focused on covering the U.S. criminal justice system. So we're a nonpartisan organization, a group of journalists, and we're really trying to focus on all the aspects of the American criminal justice system and bringing a sense of urgency to a kind of national conversation around incarceration and criminal justice in the U.S.
And by the way, today, Katie, we're talking about prisons as opposed to jails. If you could maybe explain the difference.
Sure. So while the Marshall Project does cover all aspects of the criminal justice system, the data set that we've been collecting around coronavirus cases has been focused in prisons. So those are facilities where people who have been convicted of crimes are being held, as opposed to jails where there are a much larger population. People are being held after being charged and not convicted. There's a lot more kind of churn, people coming and going. So it's
all right. So Katie, let's talk to us a little bit about what's been going on in the prisons with respect to COVID-19, if you could.
Sure. So what we found for the past month, our reporters have been collecting as much data as we can about COVID testing rates, about the number of positive cases, the number of deaths among both prisoners and prison staff. And so what we found is that as of last Wednesday, April 28th, or 29th, there are more than 14,000 cases of coronavirus in prisons across the nation. Among staff, there's more than 5,200. And we actually know a lot less about staff. Those numbers aren't being reported as readily. And a lot of prison systems actually aren't testing their own staff, and they're not tracking those numbers.
So why is that? Why are we not getting the correct numbers? Is it just negligence? Is it purposeful? Why do we not know exactly who's being tested, who's tested positive? And I'm just talking about the staff. Why do we not know this?
Well, a lot of prison systems are actually having staff being tested outside of the system itself, so through private healthcare providers, and so many of them are just tracking cases based on kind of voluntary reports about whether someone has been tested or whether someone has tested positive. So it's a lot harder to know. It seems very unlikely that. It seems more likely that someone might report to their employer that they've tested positive if they need to call in sick. But for people who are asymptomatic or for people who haven't even been able to obtain a test, that number just isn't being tracked.
Tom, let me ask you a question. There's a lot of news about potentially releasing inmates for their own protection. What are your thoughts, and maybe who should be released?
Sure. It's really been all over the place in terms of how different states are handling this. Some states have drawn up long lists of people who would be eligible for release, say people who are close to the end of their sentence anyway, people who are older, depending on certain offenses that they might have been convicted of. Other states have not had much motion on it at all. We've seen in places like Washington State and Pennsylvania, they've started to release people in drips and drabs, but it's been a very slow process so far. There are advocates around the country who've said for the safety of people both within the facilities, to give them more space to social distance, and for the people in the community, we need to release anyone we can who might be eligible. But a lot of prison systems haven't been able to respond to that very quickly yet.
Well, how do you supervise those who have been released in the community? Who does that? Is there a plan in effect? And by the way, are they going back into prison? How does it work?
In some states, in Pennsylvania, they are offering some temporary reprieves for people. And these are the exact kind of questions advocates and researchers are asking, is there any mechanism for this? I mean, so much of this crisis is really unprecedented. And you get the sense that a lot of the systems are struggling just to manage the health of their employees and the people in their prisons. Things like reporting out information on the number of people affected or processes for evaluating people for release or supervising them. It doesn't seem that that's risen to the forefront in a lot of these places yet.
Well, let me ask you, what would you like to see come from this? I mean, hopefully something good could come from this particular pandemic, at least in the prison system. What are you looking to achieve?
Well, I mean, as a journalistic organization, we're just here to cover what's happening and to sort of expose the workings of the justice system. But one thing we're keeping an eye on is this has given an opportunity for a lot of places to rethink the way they've done business in terms of the priorities for people they're arresting, how they're setting bail for people who are accused of crimes, and also, when is an appropriate time to allow people an opportunity for reprieve or clemency. And as the Marsh Project, one thing we're going to be keeping close tabs on over time is this an aberration? Is this just because of this extraordinary circumstances, some criminal justice systems and prison systems are making extraordinary changes to their operations, or will there be a lasting effect? Will this have some jurisdictions rethinking some of their policies, some of their tough on crime policies or long sentences in the long run? I think it's too early to say.
Right. And certainly with the coronavirus, the thinking is in the fall and winter, we could have a resurgence. So maybe if we put something into play now, we'll know how to handle it when it starts to come back in the fall, in the winter, with respect to the inmates. I'm just hoping that would happen.
Sure. Yeah, I think some states are probably aggressively pursuing those kind of plans. I mean, we've seen places like Ohio, North Carolina, Tennessee that have started testing almost everyone in their prisons to really get a sense of what's the scope of the epidemic there. And you get a sense that some of those systems might be thinking more farther out. If they have a better understanding of what's happening now, they'll be better prepared to plan for the future of the people they're holding and the people who work for them.
Katie, because you seem to be a little bit more on the ground than everybody else here, does it seem like there's any kind of social distancing that you can do in the jail, in the prisons, when it comes to maybe the more violent felons, some people that we definitely can't let out?
Well, one thing that our reporters have seen in several facilities is some attempt at kind of quarantining or locking down populations, prisoners who have already started showing some kind of symptoms or who have tested positive, or quarantining those who are more at risk, people with pre-existing health conditions, or people who are older. That said, there isn't really the space for social distancing in most or in prison facilities, and a lot of times the kind of basic necessities that we take for granted in terms of hygiene are not actually available to prisoners as well.
Well, first of all, Tom and Katie, I want to thank you very much for coming on the show. This is a very important topic, and I'm certainly hoping there's less coronavirus, but something tells me in the fall we may be visiting with you again, unfortunately.
Okay.
In the meantime, stay safe, and we'll be back with some more Today's Verdict right after this. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us, and of course you, the viewers, for watching. If you have any questions about today's show, or would like to see a future topic discussed, please email me at davidlesch@bronxnet.org. From all of us at Today's Verdict, always remember, know your issues, learn the law, reach a verdict with us. We'll see you next time.